This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
A look at the sweeping changes to park space and green space throughout the Memphis area. Tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. Tonight we discuss the parks, the green spaces, the general greening of Memphis that's happened over, some would say decades, some would say years. And we're joined for that conversation by Nancy Reen, President of the Memphis Green Line. Thank you very much.
Greater Memphis Green Line.
Greater Memphis Green Line. Thank you very much. Also Laura Adams from the Shelby Farms Park Conservancy. Thank you for being here. Also Tina Sullivan from the newly formed Overton Park Conservancy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And Bill Dries, senior reporter, Memphis Daily News. So let's start maybe with the Green Line. The Green Line connects so many of these parks. We had hoped to at some point have some of the Wolf River Conservancy people on. There are a whole lot of other groups, but this is a kind of representative group of some of the people introducing more green spaces, encouraging people to use these spaces. But the Green Line connects both parks eventually, downtown, all the way out to the Wolf River. Tell us about, maybe back up how that happened and what the future of the Green Line is.
Well, not to go into a lot of history, but everyone sitting here, except maybe Tina, I think she may have come just a few years later, but we had this big organization to get together and form parks and greenways and try to make them happen in some way. And so we had a big event in '06. And thousands of people came, and a lot of people couldn't get into the Botanic Garden. And so the express need for better parks and green lines and all these things was really put forward at that time frame. And we all worked together on it. It's been very collaborative, and I feel like since that date, which was in '06, we have had tremendous turnover of things happening. And once the Greater Memphis Green Line got some things started, and it became the Shelby Farms Green Line. There was so much synergy has happened since then. So many things have happened that have been better for parks and green lines and greenways all across our whole county and regional area. In fact, connecting to DeSoto County and connecting to Arkansas. And so you have any number of things which have shown how all these parks and greenways have really come to the forefront of people's ideas of what they should be doing with the property and using it.
We'll talk more about where it's going, but just to get, Shelby Farms is, a huge park, and for many years, I guess I've been in Memphis 16 years or something, and around the time I moved here, it was a point of great controversy, a road to go through it, and what's the future, and should some of that land be sold off? And it seems to me, there's this kind of sea change, where no one's talking about that now, they're talking about, you've got the Discovery playground, you've got the Green Line connecting to it. It's all about enhancing the public space, not chopping it up in any way. How has that changed? What was the source of that change over the past decade or more?
Well, really all started in about 2001. It was a vision by Ron Terry at the time, who was a great community leader, to develop a conservation easement to protect the land, a conservancy to manage it that would manage it similar to the way the Central Park Conservancy in New York City is managed, and a great master plan. So we moved that, some of us early on really moved that process forward. We worked very closely with the Land Trust for Tennessee and the governor of the state of Tennessee and the Shelby County mayor to get a land protection agreement. And basically what that did was put to bed forever the idea that the park could ever be sold off or developed for housing or industrial or commercial uses, that it could develop, but only develop in ways that were appropriate to the park. We entered into a partnership with Shelby County government and signed a management agreement to manage Shelby Farms, and then later the development and management of the Shelby Farms Green Line was added to that, so we're actually the entity that manages both the park and the Green Line. And then we launched a major master plan project because, the cure to bad things happening is to have a positive vision. So through our master plan, we've created a vision for the next 50 or 100 years of the park that we've been implementing through the development of the Green Line, the building of the Woodland Discovery Playground and the building of the Wolf River Pedestrian Bridge, which is our southern connector. The Green Line is our northern and western connector, and the bridge is our southern connector to the future and existing Wolf River Greenway.
And we'll come back to some of those plans, but let's get Tina in here from Overton Park Conservancy. You're the newest of the groups. I should disclose that I'm on the board of the Overton Park Conservancy, but that's not necessarily why we had this conversation. But what Overton Park Conservancy is coming up on a year old, 6 months old, I should know this as a board member, but it, to some degree came out of what happened with Shelby Farms, correct?
Correct. Overton Park, in its 111-year history, has had a long tradition of advocacy around the park itself. So you had citizens protecting the park when it was threatened with the I-40 expansion. We've had volunteer groups, citizen volunteer groups, who have been helping to maintain the park over the years. But when you saw the success of Shelby Farms Park, the increase in the number of visitors, the pent-up demand that seemed to be expressed with the opening of the Green Line, the timing seemed right for Overton Park Conservancy to be formed and to have its own entity focused only on that park and protecting it.
Bill?
Nancy, Tina referred there to the pent-up demand that the Green Line has really tapped into. As people have been using the Green Line, how has that use kind of expanded what you thought the uses for the Green Line would be? It seems to me as if we've seen some areas of retail development, economic development that have come up along the Green Line that have been just as surprising as just the massive and immediate use of the Green Line that we saw.
We've had some wonderful economic development about the Green Line, and they've done a fabulous job, really, they have, at Shelby Farms and getting the Green Line organized. But then you have restaurants that have come up on High Point Terrace, like Cheffy's. You have those kind of restaurants. You've had bike shops develop on the Overton Broad Connector. We've had a lot of different businesses come up that have come up because of getting the Green Line started. And you got to remember here, there was a lot of pent-up demand. All the people like to walk and ride, and where were they going to do it safely? And we clocked during a certain period of time when things were just beginning, 400 people per hour going down a certain specific part of the Green Line, the Shelby Farms Green Line, and it was just tremendous. And then, all along the way, people are saying, well, where can we go for this? We all get questions through our email. Where can we go to find a restaurant? Where all these type of things. There's definitely more room for all of that to happen. And I know they have a bike rental situation, which has worked pretty good at Shelby Farms Green Line. And I think it's a fabulous thing for economic development. And as I was saying earlier, once we get 50 miles of all these connections, that's a good economic development thing. Once you get 50 miles, people come from far away. They drive across the state or whatever to get in and stay here and stay overnight for a couple nights and use all these different green lines and greenways.
If I can add to that, she's absolutely right. The private market reaction to the Green Line has already been strong with restaurants and bike shops and bike rentals and such like that. And we wanted a way to be able to track it before the Green Line opened. So before we ever opened the Green Line, we did two things so we'd have a baseline measure. We had all of the crime rates within the corridor. It's a 100-foot wide corridor. Take from the center of the Green Line, 50 feet in each direction. We took all the neighborhoods along the Green Line and we tracked two things. We wanted to know what the crime rates were at the time we opened the Green Line, and we wanted to know what the property values were at the time we opened our Green Line, because all the research that we had done and the Greater Memphis Green Line had done showed that with these kinds of amenities that crime goes down and that economic activity and property values go up. So now we're in the process of redoing that, so we'll be able to come back to the public and report. It's been a year and a half since we opened the Green Line, and this is how it's affected your properties.
Tina, you noted that Overton Park is 111 years old, just marked that milestone, that anniversary. As you look at how Overton Park is linked up to Shelby Farms Park, to the Green Line, to other points along the Green Line, how does that change the dynamics of what Overton Park has been as an institution for multiple generations of Memphians?
Well, I think Overton Park will always be a destination, especially for people who live near the park. But I think what changes with all of these connections is that it also becomes a nexus. It also becomes the western end of a park-to-park connection, and branching out across the bridge to Arkansas, branching out to DeSoto, it becomes one small piece in a network of parks and greenways across the whole Mid-South. Very soon you'll see a direct connection from the end of the Shelby Farms Green Line to Overton Park with the Overton Broad Connector project, which is a two-way cycle track protected from traffic that'll literally take you off the Green Line and through the Broad Avenue Arts District into Overton Park. And that's just one of many connections that we plan to implement. Our piece of that is one of the connections we plan to implement in the coming year or so that improve those access points for pedestrians and cyclists so that Overton Park really does become not only a destination but also a stopover as you go to other parts of the city on your bike.
And you'll also have more of a formal eastern entrance there where Sam Cooper comes into East Parkway, which kind of changes the kind of the structure of the park actually.
It does. It opens up that part of the park to that neighborhood just east of Overton Park. Right now, you can really only access that. There's a wonderful historic pavilion there, a very popular playground and picnic area. It gets really busy on the weekends with church picnics and family reunions, but really the only way to access it right now is with your car or by walking from the other side of the park through the forest. So what that does is open up that whole area to a pedestrian connection, and then it really opens up Overton Park to an eastern. It gives us an eastern front door, basically.
And I'm not sure who to ask, but with the Harahan Bridge project, so some $30 million, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong there, federal money that connects, hopefully, that puts a path under the bridge, the old Mississippi River Bridge, connects to all the Arkansas bike trails and paths, goes through downtown, some improvements there. Does that connect to Overton Park too? I forget.
It will through a series of bike lanes.
Through bike lanes.
Yes.
And then have you been, I assume, somewhat to very involved in that whole connection with the Harahan Bridge?
There's a series of bike lanes that have gone in through the Kyle Wagenschutz and the city office of bike
Who could
and
not be
pedestrian.
here. We actually invited him also. I should mention that and just.
And so
timing-wise
there's,
couldn't do.
we're working toward 55 miles of bike lanes. And so an example would be McLean, which runs right into the park. It also is going to run up to another green line that we're working on Chelsea. And the idea is to keep the green lines or greenways, whatever we want to call them, and the bike lanes all connected, so they'll be able to go like all the way over to Uptown and then go across the bridge, go over to the it's called the Mississippi River Greenbelt. That will be included too, and that will all connect to the Overton Park. That'll all through the McLean bike
Right.
lanes and all that, and North Parkway will be able to collect to Overton Park. And I believe you're going to put some trails around the edge, possibly, to make the connection better to get to the east end.
One of our goals is to eventually have a perimeter trail.
Right, that's one of their goals. And then that will connect to the Overton Broad, and the Overton Broad will connect to the Shelby Farms Green Line.
So all this, you talk about pent-up demand, and these various projects. We talked about the bike lanes. We talked about, even Tiger Lane, which was a big outdoor project that
That's
I
been
think
helpful,
eventually will be connected to Overton Park. Excuse me. They kind of belie the notion of Memphis as this kind of overweight, people don't want to go outside, don't want to exercise thing. I mean, that really negative stereotype that lived for a long time. I don't. How does that come into play in what you do? Let's start with you. I mean, that was sort of the negative stereotype, and that be on some terrible list by some obscure magazine that no one's ever heard of.
We're starting to get on some of the good lists.
Right, and that ultimately is. I don't know how much that drives you.
Well, it does. It does because part of our mission is to improve the health of our community, and we know because the research has told us is that the more people who have access to these kinds of trails and park facilities, the more they're going to use them, and the healthier those communities become. So it's a very important driver for us.
Well, and it also was pretty surprising because in the early stages of talking about the Green Line, there was some planning that said, look, we're going to look at safety. Safety is going to be taken care of on the front end of this. And it has been. It definitely has been. But you had a lot of people using the Green Line before it was even formally open.
Yeah.
So it kind of raises a question about, okay, just how prominent were the safety concerns if you already had people out there who were using it before it opened?
Well, I mean, before it opened, it was, basically an abandoned rail bed, and the first time that I hiked it, there were encampments where people were actually, and dirty needles and all sorts of bad stuff. So it really wasn't being used in a healthy way. But when we first started doing the public input for the Green Line, because we knew that there was going to be objections, because there's always objections to change and people are afraid of what they don't know. We knew that the research said that it was going to be a better place once we converted it from abandoned rail bed to a trail. But we really had to get the public involved and engaged in that. So we did several public meetings. We went door to door. We heard people's concern. We used a lot of the research that was done. And we heard very closely that the primary concern was security, and we addressed that on the front end. We raised the funds for security cameras, which we've put in prominent places along the trail. Those go back to the Real-Time Crime Center at the Memphis Police Department. We have permanent staff that patrol our Green Line Rangers that are responsible for security and maintenance along the Green Line. And I think we've been able to prove that really over the last year and a half that it's a very safe place.
And you've confronted some of that, Tina. I mean, Overton Park, there were some perceptions, misperceptions, however you want to handle it or address it, with that there was crime, there's some bad activity happening in parts of the old growth forest. I mean, that was a priority for Overton Park. I think the real-time crime cameras went in at some point. But talk about that dealing with that perception, whether it's a misperception or not, of safety in a park in the middle of Memphis.
Well, I think Overton Park has gone through some evolution over the decades, and so some of those perceptions are lingering from earlier years. As the park has seen increased usage, those activities have been moved out. The part of the research that Laura could talk about was how when you move positive activity into an area, the criminal element is less interested in hanging out there and doing their thing. So
they got to find a quieter place.
Right.
They have too many eyes are on them.
Right.
Too many eyes are on them. They're wherever we are.
Right.
Where there's a lot of people out playing and enjoying what they're doing, then there's not so much crime.
And what as the Green Line, I think, as the overall plan goes westward, it's going to go through some rougher neighborhoods, right? I mean, what are your expectations? I mean, that inevitably it goes through some rougher neighborhoods. Do those neighborhoods see vast improvements? They
may. It depends on how it's handled, and as Laura was discussing, the security and what they've done to make it secure.
Right.
And I think there's a way of making that all happen so it is pretty safe, and it's been proven in other cities that once you get all these connections and they're all working together, and there's signs which tell where to go. You don't need to go where. Stay on there, and it's been pretty safe. And I've ridden on these Green Lines in other areas, and they'll have big signs. They'll say like, okay, we've got to break in this, make sure and turn and go over here. We're doing construction, and people follow that really well as long as you've got the signs up to tell where to go.
Right.
There have been some plans talked about for a Chelsea Avenue Green Line or Greenway, and that's a pretty interesting area because in the mid-'70s there was an attempt at something of an early Green Line in that general area near Cypress Creek. Is renewing that, renovating that, is that in the cards for that particular area?
We're trying to do Chelsea Avenue and connect it to Washington Park on the west end and then McLean Boulevard on the east end. And there is already some bike lanes on Chelsea, but the area up there on the streets has a lot of heavy truck traffic, so it's not a very safe place for kids to ride. They really need supervision. And so we're trying to get it on the old rail trail. This is actually a Union Pacific Railroad, and we're trying to make it happen right there on that rail trail. And I think that it might take longer than maybe the Shelby Farms Green Line did, but we're hoping that won't happen.
Well, and the Shelby Farms Green Line is now about to move into the old CSX rail and go east.
We're working on that. We're working on Green Line West and Green Line East at the same time. The Green Line West, we may only be able to take it as far as where it gets to the viaduct and hooks up to to Walnut Grove Road initially, but and we're working on that, and we have some design in the process. We're also working on Green Line East. There was a grant that, together with Shelby County government, we were able to get for the acquisition and construction of that trail, and we've already raised the private match for it, and we're in the environmental stage, and once we finish that, we'll begin the negotiation with the railroad. And it's entirely realistic that the Green Line will go all the way to the old Cordova train depot in Cordova within the next 18 months.
And that would involve crossing Germantown Parkway, which
Yes.
would be I believe would be the biggest crossing that we've talked about so far in terms of
Yeah, our
traffic.
our early studies with the traffic engineers and conversations with the county engineer and the city engineer is it's doable.
And unlike, I mean, we talked about this a little bit before the show. We spent a lot of time in the show talking about the schools where the suburbs and the city can't quite get along. The Green Line crosses
It's all-
multiple
We're
municipalities.
all collaborating together. It's really working with that. That's not, you don't have any issues. The Wolf River Conservancy is going into the Germantown Greenway. The Germantown Greenway is making more of Germantown Greenway to connect with the Collierville trails. So the whole thing, I think, as far as parks and greenways, is flowing along pretty well.
And it's interesting because we've touched a bit on the history of Overton Park and Shelby Farms Park and the controversies in the past and the battles over what is the land use going to be. And the land uses we have now, even though the parks share that similar heritage, there are some differences because, Tina, you have a number of institutions within Overton Park, Brooks, the Levitt Shell, all of those the zoo too,
Golfing.
as well. And Laura, your constituency at Shelby Farms Park, which is the same as the Overton Park constituency, sees Shelby Farms Park in kind of a different light as well in terms of land use and those kind of institutions. They want it pretty much to remain as it is.
Well, with improvements.
Right.
I mean, we've already made improvements, and we have more improvements to come. And I love Shelby Farms. I choose to spend my time there when I'm not working. But in reality, it's really an abandoned farm. So I mean, there are lots of improvements. There's not a single natural lake on the old property. People like to think that Shelby Farms is natural, but it's not. It was a forest that was chopped down for farmland that became a penal farm that was abandoned, and now it's a park. Over the years, trails have been added. The lakes were dug. Most of the lakes were dug to support the farming operation. Patriot Lake was dug when the county needed fill for the landfill. And improvements are in order. Part of the improvements are to continue to improve programming, like we did at Woodland Discovery Playground, by adding new good programming and amenities at the core of the park at Patriot Lake and improving the ecology of the lake. But the rest of it really is in restoring and improving the natural resource, restoring it to an improved natural state.
Tina, the Conservancy, I believe, is separate from the operation of the zoo and the Brooks and the
That's
Levitt
correct.
Shell. But talk a little bit about how people choose to use Overton Park.
Well, I think that's one of the things that's unique about Overton Park. When you go to Shelby Farms Park, you have this wonderful wide open space where you can take a 7-mile bicycle trip without looping back on yourself. When you come to Overton Park, you can choose to walk in the deep woods in this ancient forest in the middle of the city, or you can choose to go to a museum, or you can choose to go to a free concert at the Levitt Shell in the same location where Elvis was giving concerts back in the day, or you can choose to take your family to the zoo. So there are so many activities. You could spend a whole day there and still not take advantage of everything. So you end up getting your different needs fulfilled. You can take your dog to Overton Park, and that's a daily ritual for so many people who use the park every day. You may not go to the zoo every day, but you're definitely going to need to walk your dog. So it's just it's a variety. It's a little something for everyone.
And there's been some need for discussion about where the park boundaries begin or where they begin to blend in with the zoo. How are those talks going as the zoo looks at, I believe, the Chickasaw Bluffs project that it wants to do.
Well, those boundaries are actually now set, so no discussion needs to occur any further about those boundaries. One of the wonderful things about the Conservancy coming in is that those conversations between the zoo and the other park users can be held collaboratively between the Conservancy and the zoo. We can help facilitate that discussion, and one of the goals of the Conservancy is to get all of the park entities working together. Our long-term vision is that we're a park not only for Midtown Memphis and the greater Memphis region, but that eventually we become our own destination park where we market ourselves to people far outside of Memphis as a place to come visit and spend your day, your vacation here. Our conference attendees come and spend the day at Overton Park.
Last question, we've got about a minute left. There is road construction being discussed. The state is going to put a loop in, Laura, in Shelby Farms. Where does that stand right now? When the road there that where all the traffic gets backed up, what's the status of that project in 30 seconds or so?
Well, the current north-south road through the park is Farm Road, and according to the city and TDOT's road design, that would be replaced by a new road that would be on the far western edge of the park. That would be Kirby Witten Parkway, maybe renamed to Shelby Farms Parkway. I don't really know exactly where that is because it's not our road, it's our park, and we take full responsibility for the natural resources of the park. But if and when the parkway does go in, we have assurances from the city and the county that bike lanes and tunnels and connectivity.
All right. Well, thank you. I cut you off there, but we're out of time. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.